former Justice Department Attorney John Yoo, former FBI Assistant Director Ron Hosko. Ron, I do feel obliged to ask you about the timing of that New York AG report on this day. Just coincidence, or you accept it at face value?
Well, Neil, I think at this point in time, there's always, we always need to look behind any kind of press release to see what's the motivation, what is the relationship to the timing. So I think yet to be determined on the timing of that one, but we ought to be cautious and perhaps a little bit suspicious of it. Here, I just walking in here, I saw the kind of the high-level New York Times commentary on the Inspector General piece about Jim Comey. It looks like there's no smoking gun there on his motives on Hillary Clinton timing and politics involved in the decision making, but certainly it reopens the wounds as it relates to the FBI.
John, there's so much we still don't know about in the detailed report we're going to get out of the Inspector General's office, but there presumably will be something for everyone, including for Republicans, the notion that these guys were incompetent, that James Comey was grandstanding, that there are more exchanges between a number of top officials there who thought dimly of the prospect of Donald Trump becoming president. I was mentioning all that and these emails, particularly from Peter Strzok and others at the beginning of this show. I don't want to necessarily go rehashing all of that, but there's enough there to feed the argument on both sides that Comey botched it. What do you think of that?
I think that's right, Neil. I think on one hand, as Ron just said, Democrats can take comfort from the fact that the report will appear to show that there was no outright political bias to help Hillary Clinton and defeat President Trump using the Hillary Clinton investigation. Although, note, there's still an Inspector General investigation still yet to come on the whole Russia investigation.
Right.
However, Republicans, however, I think can say, look, President Trump was wise to fire Jim Comey. Look at all the things he did. The report suggests that he was insubordinate. But I think worse than that, and I think many Americans should be worried by an FBI director who was starting to approach Hoover-esque boundaries by trying to grab power away from the Justice Department, claim the right to interpret the law, to make prosecutorial decisions, when the FBI's only job is to assemble the facts and bring them to the prosecutors. You also see, I think, quite a bit of mismanagement on the part of Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General under President Obama at the end, who apparently never talked to Comey about these highly controversial rule-breaking decisions. These are violations of Justice Department procedure to make an announcement you're not going to prosecute Hillary Clinton and then to change your mind at the end of October. Jim Comey was never supposed to speak about this case in public.
He did. We know that in retrospect he did because, Ron, apparently he thought that the Justice Department would not, and so he felt compelled to do so. The only question I have still is that around the same time when we know there were these questions bubbling about the Russian thing, why there was a real clear concern not to go crazy on the email stuff that could damage Hillary Clinton, because in the end, he opted to take a course of action that didn't damage her, when in fact he was on to something far, far potentially bigger that could affect the guy she was running against. What do you make of that?
Well, Neil, I think the timing is and the details are critically important. How much did the director and the FBI know about Hillary Clinton and her emails at the time in early summer of 2016 versus how much did they really know about Carter Page, about George Papadopoulos, about a potential Russia, or at least an intent to penetrate the campaign at that same time and even deeper into 2016. I think those two things are very, very different. We ought to be listening to the Inspector General in how the FBI proceeded. He is, at least today, the most impartial arbiter of that information. And so, I'm looking to read the entire report myself before I reach those conclusions. I think what the Inspector General has to say and the ground he's covered is important.
How can they come to the conclusion, John, real quickly, that whatever Comey botched, it was not deliberate political bias?
Apparently, it can only come from looking at texts emails, and interviews. Now, that doesn't absolutely settle the question, of course, because who knows what they thought in their minds, and you're going to see, I believe, a series of texts between two of the subordinates for Jim Comey who are having an affair, which do have partisan bias to it or seem somewhat lurid, but in the general picture, apparently the report doesn't show that. But again, who knows what's in the minds of the people? Right, but I don't see any evidence yet of some kind of partisan bias.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both very, very much.